Hello, my name is Meredith. Welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be discussing the one, the only, New Moon by Stephenie Meyer. It's the second book in the Twilight series, and it's quite the doozy, but I didn't think it would be enough fun to just read the book and interpret it and wear a corset the way I did last time. So instead, I thought we could have a little bit of a challenge going. See, I've been a member of Team Edward my whole life, and loud and proud about it. But I was shocked when reading The Twilight Saga, the official illustrated guide, to find out that Stephenie Meyer actually considered it a real possibility that Bella ended up with Jacob. And I am nothing if not a scholar, okay? So I set out to read New Moon with one goal in mind. Could I brainwash myself into being a member of Team Jacob, even if it's just temporarily? But before we fully dive in, there's a little bit of housekeeping we have to do. The first is that I actually have fun plans for later in the Twilight series that I want to do, but it involves needing some, we'll say, statistics from Twilight fans. So I've included a Google form in the description. I would love it so much if you filled it out. You do not have to, obviously. You do not have to submit your email with it. I'm not sure if it gives you the choice to or not, but please don't. I don't need your emails. It's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the responses. I've also made every single question optional, so if there is any question along the way that you don't feel comfortable answering, please feel free to skip it. I would have just posted this on my Instagram, but unfortunately, I don't have that many Instagram followers. But you can fix that. Follow me on Instagram. That way I can do more surveys over there and make them a part of the videos without kind of having to put it as an intro to a video before, because then I have to plan ahead. And as a girl with ADHD, I can tell you, I don't do that often. So it would help me out a lot if you guys followed me over there. Thank you. The last thing I want to say before we get started is that this book covers some subjects that can be sensitive to some viewers. Specifically, we're going to be talking about suicide a lot in this video. So if that's a subject that's difficult for you, I totally understand. I appreciate you so much, and I will see you in the next one. Now, before I read this book, I knew I had to have my mindset right. So I asked my friends Logan and Callahan to come over and attempt a little light brainwashing. The rules were nothing permanently damaging to me, nothing permanently damaging to our friendship, and I didn't want to eat anything weird.
Hey, have you guys ever heard of Project MK Ultra?
Is this gonna get me put on a list?
No. During the 70s and 80s, the CIA was experimenting with psychic warfare, kinda. Okay. But really what they wanted to create was sleeper agents. Part of that, they did a bunch of experiments, psychological experiments, specifically with isolation. And basically the CIA found out a really good way to kind of delete a personality. I'm gonna do that.
You're gonna delete my personality?
No. I'm modifying it. The thing that really worked was having the strongest acid that's ever existed and dosing people when they didn't know. I don't have that.
Okay.
So I got her a 4 Loko.
So I did say no permanent damage.
Without the acid, I think you're fine.
Okay.
Because I need to borrow a few things from you.
You're gonna blindfold me and put me in oven mitts and make me drink a 4 Loko?
Yeah, because you have to be sensory deprived. It looks like chemical.
I feel like it shouldn't be clear.
Oh my god! Oh my god! You're not supposed to see that. Why is it clear? It's like Crystal Pepsi.
I mean, it's not gonna work no matter what.
That's confident.
Okay.
This is what turned Ted Kaczynski into the Unabomber.
This is what turned Ted Kaczynski into the Unabomber? Is MK Ultra? That's documented, or?
I can show you the facts. I can show you him signing up for the experiments.
He signed. Wait, is this real?
This is real.
He signed. I don't believe you.
Also, wait. I need to tape those to your hands.
What? They taped oven mitts to Ted Kaczynski's hands and
Okay,
turned him into the Unabomber?
We're given acid.
Did they use oven mitts?
Yeah. Well, that's part of the experiment.
They taped oven mitts to their hands?
Yeah. It's part of the sensory deprivation, so you can't feel anything.
But I can feel the oven mitts.
But you can't feel anything but the oven mitts.
What?
Ow.
I can feel that.
Bella! Where the hell have you been, Luca?
My name is Meredith,
My name is Meredith. I used to like Edward,
but now I will like Jacob.
but now I will like Jacob.
Bella! Where the hell have you been, Luca?
1. I love Jacob.
1. I love Jacob.
He is better than Edward.
He is better than Edward.
Social, that could be you.
Is it like a thought bubble?
No, it's telling you where the wolf is. He's nicer and kinder than Edward.
He's nicer and kinder than Edward.
Bella! Where the hell have you been, Luca?
He is warm, and I can hug him without freezing, unlike Edward.
He is warm, and I can hug him without freezing, unlike Edward. Okay. Oh, all right.
And then the other?
Okay. Cool. Sharp as blades.
That could be you. Look, that's when he's carrying her, but that could be you. Join the wolf pack.
Bella! Where the hell have you been, little girl?
It is not weird how Jacob imprinted on Bella's daughter.
It is not weird how Jacob imprinted on Bella's daughter.
He is not well.
He is not.
He's just misunderstood.
He is just misunderstood.
Like me.
Like me. That did not work. As great as their attempts were, my friends did not succeed in brainwashing me into being a member of Team Jacob. So we had to try a different approach. Lucky for me, my amazing, wonderful, beautiful best friend is a proud member of Team Jacob. So I thought we'd ask her. Why? Hi everyone! Please welcome my best friend Arie. She's doing an interview for the channel.
Hi everyone!
So, as you remember, it almost ruined our friendship when I found out you were Team Jacob.
Honestly, I saw you differently after I found out you were Team Edward. I was like,
I can't believe that surprised you, to be honest. I feel like Team Edward is more like usual.
Yes, I would agree, but because we are the same person, I expected us to have the same reaction to these boys. So I was shocked.
One of my first questions, I guess, is like, what drew you to Jacob originally? Like, what, were you a book girl or a movie girly, actually, is probably where we should start.
Both. I read the books when I was in elementary school, and I was Team Jacob from the books. But I think I got into the books because when the first Twilight came out, I wanted to see it really badly. And my dad said that I had to read the books before I could see the movie. So I was originally going to be a movie girl, but then I read all of the books first before going to see the first Twilight. And I was Team Jacob from the start. Now, did this stem probably from, at the time, my crush in elementary school was named Jacob? Yes. So that probably had a lot to do with me being Team Jacob in the first place. But I still stand by elementary school's decision to be Team Jacob.
So this is going to be a hard thing to remember back to, so it's totally cool if you don't remember. But do you remember, like, when you read the very first Twilight book, were you drawn to Jacob as a character, or was it not until you got to New Moon?
Well, they weren't really pushing Jacob, from what I remember, in the first book very hard. So I just remember not really vibing with Edward throughout the first book and being like, okay, like I'm here for this, but I was never like super into Edward. And Jacob was introduced in the first book from what I remember. And I just remember thinking he was like funny and cool. And I liked his vibe better. It just felt less intense. Edward felt like a lot for me. Even then, I just knew like there's a lot going on there and a lot that like she would have to do in order to be with him. And Jacob just kind of like made more sense. But I don't think I was fully obsessed with Jacob until New Moon. New Moon was like my favorite.
So New Moon is your favorite of the 4 books?
Yeah.
Have you read Midnight Sun?
I have read Midnight Sun. Yeah, I read because that came out in quarantine.
How did you feel about Midnight Sun then?
Well, I think now as an adult, I'm a Robert Pattinson fan. So I read that book with Robert Pattinson in mind, less Edward. And I know this doesn't make sense, but it's like I read that book picturing now Robert Pattinson, who I think is great. So I enjoyed reading the book. I enjoyed reading from his perspective what it was like falling in love, and the classroom scene when he sees Bella for the first time was my favorite thing ever that I read out of that book, and learning what kind of like murderous vampire he actually is was really awesome. Actually, I was like, this is very interesting. But see, even from his perspective, he was like, Jacob's a better option for Bella. So I enjoyed having him admit it and see that, you know, Bella really should be with Jacob, but he just can't let that happen. So
if you had to talk somebody into being a Team Jacob fan, where would you start?
All of the reasons that younger me was really Team Jacob, I feel like are harder as an adult because you're like, you know, you're reading a book, like you suspend your disbelief. But when I was a kid, I could not fathom that she was willing to give up all of her friends, all of her family, say goodbye to everyone that she's ever loved, to be turned into a vampire, to be with Edward forever. Like it just, I could not wrap my head around that. And I was like, I get that you love him and you care about him, but you have this beautiful man who is obsessed with you, who you can age with, and you don't have to give up your family, you don't have to give up your friends, and you also love him just as much. Like, to me, it was such a clear answer where I was like, I don't care how much I love this dude, I wouldn't give up my family and my friends. And even in like 6th grade, I couldn't wrap my head around the fact that she was willing to do that. So I would just lay out the like logical plot points where I would be like, we're going to think about these relationships less from whoever makes you feel the most, I guess, and like what makes the most sense long term. Because the books end up happy, but when you're going through that journey, you don't know that. Like, you have no idea how things are going to go. She was giving up everything. She was giving up having kids. She was giving up being able to have a normal life. And I just felt like she could have a normal life without losing everything that was important to her to be with Jacob. And I think like her ending up with Edward before we know how it goes is promoting giving up everything in your life for a man and changing your whole personality to be with a man and basically morphing into him and what he wants. And I know that he didn't want her to be a vampire and she's the one who wanted that, but it just is textbook like toxic relationship. I don't care. I'm in love with this person and I'm going to do everything that doesn't make sense and it's okay. And Jacob's sitting over there like, bro, what the fuck are you doing? Rightfully so. Rightfully so. And also, like, I know that Edward is a good person now, but he has murdered people. He has murdered people. He has drained them from blood. And I personally wouldn't be able to get over that. I would be like, you're a good person now, but you did kill people. Whereas Jacob is like a protector and he has never hurt anybody. His only job is to kill vampires who kill the people in their town. I just couldn't get past it. I know that people can change and be better, but that would be hard for me that you had a previous life as a murderer.
I have to say, as your best friend, it makes me happy to know that you don't want to date a murderer.
I would hope so.
Wait, but I want to touch on more on like what you said when you were answering my question, because I think it's so interesting. I feel like you almost have it backwards from how people usually experience these kinds of books, because it's like when you're a kid, you're like, oh, I love Edward so much, he's so great. And then you grow up into your adulthood and you're like,
uh-huh.
Right? And I feel like you just went into it backwards where like you're reading it as a kid like, what is wrong with this guy, why does this girl want him? But then as an adult you're like, man, we can all have fun reading books and who cares, it's just a book. One of the things that I found the most interesting when I was reading the Twilight Saga, the official illustrated guide, this right here, when I was reading this, one of the things I found the most interesting is that it starts with an interview with Stephenie Meyer, and at one point she said that when she was writing New Moon, she genuinely didn't know if Bella was going to end up with Jacob or Edward. Like, Jacob became a real option. And she said that the end of New Moon dictated to her how the whole series ended.
I fully believed that Jacob had a chance when I was reading the books. I fully thought that there was the potential for her to really pick Jacob.
I'm putting you on the spot here. I did not ask you to prepare this ahead of time, but
That's okay.
Can you come up with a hypothetical ending of New Moon that leads to Bella and Jacob ending up together at the end of the series?
If she had never jumped off the cliff and then Alice thought that she died, and instead she had waited it out, if that makes sense. Like, if her and Jacob had just been doing exactly what they were doing, continued working on motorcycles, hanging out after school, spending more time together, I eventually do think they would have kissed, or like, instead of him forcing it on her. But instead of that, I think they probably would have gotten together. I think eventually Edward would have missed Bella and like tried to come back and check on her or like see what was going on and seen that she was happy with Jacob, and then potentially left her alone. But I think it would have had to have been Edward's decision to leave her alone, unfortunately, because I do think obviously that she liked Edward more than she liked Jacob. But again, it's that toxic relationship thing. And Taylor Swift has a song about it that she just put out recently where she was like, oh, sometimes I think about jumping off of a very tall something to see if you would like come find me. And it's true. Like, when you go through breakups, you're like, wow, it's really toxic, but it's true. Where people have those weird invasive thoughts where they're like, oh no, like if something happened to me, the person would call me and come check on me and like realize that they missed me. That's exactly what happened there, where he thought that she died and he was like, I'm going to go kill myself. And then she was like, oh my God, he's going to hurt himself. Like, I can't let that happen. And she had to go get him. But I really do think that if everything had been fine and both of them were like alive and well, and the other one knew that, you know, they were alive and well and it was okay, I think if they had just waited longer, that she would have ended up with Jacob. But then I do believe that if there was an eclipse, that if Edward had come back, I think she would have dropped Jacob like a hot little tomato. I don't think she would have stayed with him if Edward was like, okay, I want you back. I think she'd have been like, okay, great.
I don't think there was a world in which Bella ever would have chosen Edward. So I think you're right Bella ever. I keep misspeaking. Maybe I am already
Okay.
brainwashed.
I'm like, I'm getting to you.
Oh, well, thank you so much for coming on. This was so much fun. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so proud that I could represent the Team Jacob girlies. We are underappreciated, but going strong.
All right. Well, I will let you know if it works and if I end up a Team Jacob fan after reading this book.
Yay! Bye, everyone.
All right, so now we have a direction. As I'm reading this book, I just need to focus on Jacob being better for Bella. That Bella would not have to give up so much of her human life to be with Jacob, the way that she would to be with Edward. Seems doable, right? So I opened up the book, ready to set off on this new path to discover if there's any merit to this whole Team Jacob thing. And boy, was I surprised when I saw what's on the very first page of this book. Before the narrative even starts, a Romeo and Juliet quote. These violent delights have violent ends, and in their triumph die, like fire and powder, which as they kiss, consume. Right away, an understanding just hits me like a ton of bricks. This book is a Romeo and Juliet retelling with a different ending. I don't know how I didn't notice that as a kid, because I at the time that I read this, I would have been at least aware of Romeo and Juliet, but I don't know that I was really reading anything with like the intention of analyzing it, right? It's essentially asking the question of what would happen if Juliet had woken up before Romeo could kill himself. What would have happened then? Would they have lived happily ever after? Could they have gotten over this insane and traumatic event in their lives? And right away, I'm just left with this feeling that Jacob was never really an option. But I promised I'd try. So I opened to page 1, and I got to reading. Right away, I was struck by how concise and readable the previous book recap was. A lot of times these portions of books can be borderline unreadable, especially when you've read the book prior to it. They annoy me every time, and I typically just try to brush through them as quickly as I can, especially if I remember what happened in the last book, because I, for example, made an entire in-depth video essay about it like 2 months ago. But I found this exposition to be very readable, and so I commend her for that, because I think that's a difficult thing to do. But something else feels off about this beginning section, which we're going to come back to in a minute. Bella and Edward start off the book as a happy couple. Bella is bemoaning her 18th birthday, as it means she is now older than Edward. Keep in mind that canonically Edward is at least 117, if not 118 years old at this point, but in theory his body was frozen when he was 17, so Bella turning 18 makes her physically older than Edward, even if he's lived 100 more years than she has. And she's upset about this. Bella does not want to celebrate this horrible day, but Edward insists, and so does his family. But she convinces them to put it off by having Edward come over and watch Romeo and Juliet before the party. Stephenie Meyer really did everything she could to get the teenagers reading this book to understand what she was doing. I still did not get it at the time. I'm sure some of you did, I'm sure some of you didn't. I did not realize it until I read it just now. Not a lot of thoughts going up here for young Mare, and that's still kind of true, but anyway. They watch Romeo and Juliet, and Edward spends the entire movie bashing Romeo. Is that foreshadowing? Who's to say? So like I said, the Cullens throw Bella an extravagant party, where of course Bella gets a paper cut, which causes Jasper to lunge at her because she is now bleeding, and he is the least used to the presence of human blood of all the vampires. And Edward, in his attempt to mitigate the situation, decides to, for some reason, tackle Bella instead of tackling Jasper. Don't ask me why. Tackles her into a crystal bowl, where she then gashes her arm open and bleeds everywhere, causing all of the vampires to have to leave the room except for Carlisle. Don't you hate it when that happens on your birthday? And you did it at my birthday dinner. Carlisle stitches her up no problem and sends her home. No harm, no foul, right? Well, not quite, because this shakes Edward up a lot, and he's very stoic with her over the next few days. Bella is nervous, but she's convinced they're so in love. They'll fix this. They'll get over this. A few days later, Edward walks her into the woods. Don't ask me why. Don't ask me why he decides to break up with her in the woods. This feels like a conversation they could, in theory, have in her living room, but he walks her to the woods, like right outside her house, to tell her that he doesn't want to be with her anymore and he's actually leaving the city and she'll never see him again. She keeps trying to convince him it's not that bad. He can keep her safe. She's safest with him. And finally, he tells her, I don't love you anymore. I don't want to be with you. I want something else. I just want to prance around and have fun, and I don't want to be held down by you. Then he makes her promise that she won't do anything reckless or stupid, and he swears it'll be like she never met him, and he leaves. She's obviously heartbroken by this, and she takes to wandering the forest searching for him, afraid to stop her wandering as it means he's truly gone. She's rescued by a man she doesn't know, who Charlie calls Sam, and we proceed to have the famous 4-month page turn. But before we really dive into that and what happens afterwards, I want to call something out about this section of the book. The thing that I find so interesting about this section is it harkens to a point I made in my first video, which is that Stephenie Meyer is a lot better an author than people give her credit for. Spoiler alert, this book involves a boy named Jacob that ends up falling for Bella, and they get caught in a love triangle. That's important context. With that in mind, I read this section and I noticed something super interesting. Even before Bella's birthday, the differences between her and Edward were being called out super often. Starting with her birthday gives us the opportunity to talk about how much younger she is than Edward, how he is immortal while she is not, which is obviously like a small barrier to being in a long-term relationship. There's also some really powerful imagery, specifically in the lunchroom, where Bella, Edward, and Alice sit on one side of a table, and Bella's human friends sit on the other side of the table. Bella remarks on how this is an attempt from everybody involved to keep a connection between the two sides of the table, but how the conversation never really flows past this invisible line. This is really stark imagery that shows us that Bella is being separated from her humanness, essentially. Her human connections, her human friends, and ultimately her human life. That by choosing the vampires, she is isolating herself from her human side. She is doomed to always be near them, but never be one of them, the same as the other vampires. There are also a lot of quotes about how fragile she is, such as, "He handled me very carefully, pressing just the tips of his fingers softly against my temples, my cheekbones, my jawline, like I was especially breakable," which was exactly the case, compared to him at least. I love that quote because it's so hard to visualize how Edward is holding her face in this moment. He's got his fingers softly against her temples, her cheekbones, and her jawline. So is it this? Is this what he's doing? Because, like, this feels a lot more natural, but, like, it certainly implies that he's doing this, right? Anyway, these are just some of the examples of Stephenie Meyer calling out the differences between Bella and Edward. She's intentionally showing us here the different ways they're incompatible. Do not think this was an accident. It's subtle, but it's clearly intentional. And I can't help but think about Arie's point that Jacob was better for Bella, that Jacob allowed Bella to stay human. This reasoning from Team Jacob is not a clever thing that they figured out on their own. This was very intentional by Stephenie Meyer. She knows that the readers love Edward, and so in order to get anyone to buy into this book, she has to give them some kind of reason to be rooting for Jacob. She could have made Bella fall head over heels for Jacob, the same way that she did with Edward, and made it an actual dilemma when Edward came back, who Bella was going to choose. But she either didn't want to do that herself, didn't think that was realistic for Bella, or thought the readers would be really mad about that and would feel like it was unrealistic. With how deeply and suddenly they fell in love in the first book, teenagers would have a hard time believing that Bella was able to just flip a switch and fall for Jacob just as hard the same way and still believe that the love is real and isn't some kind of strange infatuation. So that's why I think she didn't do that, but for whatever reason, she does not have Bella feel as strongly for Jacob as she does for Edward at any point in this book. Even Arie admitted that. So she's got to change our view of Edward and also harp on the things in the relationship that make them so different. I also think this is why she had Edward do the whole "I don't love you anymore" thing, because realistically, I don't think it changes that much of the plot either way, but that is a huge blow to Bella's confidence. And even me, as an adult reader, read that and got honestly really upset with Edward. You're reading it like you just didn't have to do that. You were leaving anyway. Like, why did you think you had to do that? And he gives like a fake reasoning in the end, but I don't think his fake reasoning that he gives her is the real reason why Stephenie Meyer had him say that. I think the reason she did is because she wanted to make us angry at Edward, giving us a better opportunity to fall for Jacob. Stephenie Meyer did the best she could, in my opinion, to set readers up to want Bella to be with Jacob in some way. Now, that obviously did not work on that many readers, and I do think it's because, as we'll get into it, you'll see that Bella just never really feels as strongly for Jacob as she ever did for Edward. So it really is a more unpopular opinion to be Team Jacob than it is to be Team Edward. And even members of Team Jacob would tell you that. But kudos to Stephenie Meyer. She really did try to sell us on the idea that Jacob was a possibility. Again, for whatever reason, was not willing to make Bella's feelings as strong for Jacob as they were for Edward, but in every other aspect truly made an effort to make us like Jacob. Say what you will about the page turn month thing, a lot of people call it cringe. And especially people who pick up the book now and don't understand the youth culture at the time that this book came out, they look at that and they're like, God, this is so weird. Like, why did people think this book was so good? I don't care. I thought it slapped back then, and I still think it slaps now, okay? I still think this was such a smart move. You can think it's stupid, that's fine. But you can't convince me that middle school you, if you were at that age at this time, did not think that was genius. We have to remember who her audience is. Her audience is young kids. We're talking 12 to like 16, 17. This is her target demographic. It's a young adult novel. It's intended for teens. So yes, it's a little Tumblr fake deep depression cringe. But so what? That was youth culture. She knew her demographic and she targeted the book at them, and that's commendable. So 4 months have now passed. October, November, December, January, all Edwardless. And Bella has been in a funk this whole time. Some might use the word depression. And Charlie essentially demands that Bella not have depression anymore in a very nice and supportive way. And he does suggest that she seek professional mental health treatment. Go Charlie. We love Charlie. This is a Charlie Stan household. I will have no Charlie slander in the comments. On page 82, we have truly the best line in any book ever. This slapped me across the face when I read it. I cannot begin to describe to you the feeling when these words graced my eyes. I cannot believe this. This is a real line, you guys. Should I find it in the book so I can prove it? Let's turn to page 82. We were working on Animal Farm, an easy subject matter. I didn't mind communism. It was a welcome change from the exhausting romances that made up most of the curriculum. Yes, right there, I underlined it. Check it out. Is that gonna focus? Because I have it. There we go. I didn't mind communism. I didn't mind communism. I know she's just trying to get across that Bella is very exhausted by romances at this point. She doesn't want to read romances because it reminds her too much of Edward. I get that's what she's saying. So Bella doesn't mind communism like as a book subject matter is what she's saying, that the romances bother her a lot more. But I would like to consider it canon now that Bella is a communist. Then Bella decides to get Charlie off her back to convince him that she is not depressed and she does not need to go to therapy, which honestly would probably be so good for her. And I think this book would have taken a completely different direction if she had gone to therapy at this point. But she doesn't want to. So she's got to convince Charlie that she's coming out of this funk, right? So she asks Jessica to go see a movie with her. It's a zombie movie, but of course there's a romantic scene in the beginning. And Bella runs from the theater dramatically, returning like 20 minutes later when she's sure it's all blood and guts on the screen, as opposed to a disgusting kissing scene. It's too painful, you see. After the movie, they're walking to dinner when they walk past a group of men who catcall them, which reminds Bella of the experience that she had in the previous book that Edward saved her from, where these men tried to attack her. She's not sure if it's them or not, but as they're catcalling her, she gets kind of nervous and she hears Edward's voice in her head, telling her to be careful, reminding her of her promise. She's so stunned by this that she actually starts to approach the men, trying to figure out if they are the men from before, but also trying to see if the voice will keep talking to her. And much to her enjoyment, the voice does keep talking to her as she approaches them, telling her to be careful and eventually growling at her. But eventually Bella realizes this is not the same guys and the voice disappears. So she walks away, returns home with a very angry Jessica. Which I would be too, girl. Are you kidding me? But hearing Edward's voice reminds her of this promise that she made him. And she realizes that he has kept none of his promises to her, so why should she keep her promises to him? Which I fundamentally agree with, go queen. You don't owe him anything, but also, like, let's just think about our survival a little bit. The danger was the most alive she's felt in months. She's desperate to recreate it. Miraculously, as she's driving around, she finds 2 broken down motorcycles by the side of the road, which the owners insist upon giving to her for free because they just don't work and there's no way to make them run. And they don't even know why she wants them. They were waiting for the dumpster to pick them up. But luckily, for both her and for the plot, she knows a very good mechanic. A 16-year-old boy named Jacob Black. Jacob vaguely mentioned fixing up a car one time. Why don't I bring these motorcycles to him and see if he knows how to fix them? He agrees both to help her and to keep it a secret from Charlie. Cue montage of them hanging out and fixing up the bikes and bonding. Something to establish here now. Jacob is 16, which makes him 2 years younger than Bella in the book. This is not just a passing fact. It's discussed quite regularly and integrated pretty well into his character, in my opinion. In these early early parts of the book, Jacob is naive and immature. But they start to play this game as they're hanging out, where various skills and life experiences add and take away from their overall age at that time. The argument being that maybe they're physically a certain age, but what age is their maturity? This is a running joke that lasts for at least 50 pages. And is brought back up near the end of the book. And I will commend her for writing a realistic 16-year-old, because a lot of young adult authors are afraid of doing that. And they make their main characters weirdly adult-like, even though they're supposed to be teenagers. So I commend her for making him realistic as a 16-year-old. But it did make me feel a little weird. If it was just a passing mention of his age, I probably would have forgotten and just naturally have pictured him to be a little bit older. But his childish nature and the constant mention of his actual age, and all the fake ages and all the joking about ages just really hammered home how young he is. This doesn't bother me for Bella and Jacob being together because they're only 2 years apart in age, so I don't personally have an issue with that, like in world, in book. At the same time, it served as this massive barrier for me imagining Jacob to be a romance hero. Such an important part of romance is self-insert. If you can't see yourself dating at least one member of this couple, it makes it so much harder to relax and enjoy the book as a romance. Because Stephenie Meyer never really let me forget Jacob's true age, it was really hard for me to casually enjoy this book the way that I enjoy a typical romance. Which sucks, because I'm being serious about trying to brainwash myself here. I really did try to do this. And the approach that I was taking at this point in reading the book was to attempt to forget the ending of the book and read this as though it's a friends to lovers romance about a girl who got dumped by a toxic ex, finding love in a man that's good at fixing motorcycles and sometimes turns into a giant wolf. But he's not a man. He's a boy. So that strategy was out the window for me. I really couldn't view this as a normal romance because I just could never really see Jacob as a romantic option. He just felt like a child to me through so much of the book. And that's just a downside of reading it as an adult. If I were in the target demographic, I totally could have considered Jacob to be a romantic option. Maybe more realistically than I would have otherwise if he was more mature and older. So this is not criticism of this book. I don't think this was a bad decision on Stephenie Meyer's part. I actually think it was really smart. I'm just sharing that it made it more difficult for me to become Team Jacob. That's all. The only other thing I want to point out is a snippet on page 145. Let's turn to page 145. 145. In my copy, at least. I don't know if the page numbers match up. I have the white ones. Jake is a little bit upset in this scene, and Bella gives him a big hug and tells him it's going to be okay. And he says, if this is how you're going to react, I'll freak out more often. Flip page. We're now on 146. Jacob's voice was light, normal again, and his laughter rumbled against my ear. His fingers touched my hair, soft and tentative. Well, it was friendship for me. I pulled away quickly, laughing with him, but determined to put things back in perspective at once. Jacob has feelings for Bella, and Bella knows this, but she just wants to be friends. We will talk about them more in a bit, but for now I just wanted to point that out. So they fix up the bikes together, they spend a lot of time together, and when they ride them, Bella hears Edward's voice again. She is thrilled about this. And then she crashes and has to go get looked at the hospital, which happens multiple times over the next few weeks, and yet somehow Charlie does not get suspicious. Bella's clumsy, you see. I'm so sorry. I do have to talk about it. I have to mention it, okay? This is the biggest downfall for the Team Jacob argument, in my opinion. The entire thesis behind Team Jacob is that he is better for Bella, that she would not have to give up so much of her human life to be with him. While that is still true, the human life aspect of this is absolutely true, and that will never not be true. She could be with Jacob and stay a human. Jacob is the ultimate where's my hug guy. He's a where's my hug guy. And you know what? Instead of making the argument myself, I'm just gonna read you some sections. I have 4 examples here. Let's turn to page 165. I took the candy, but I was trying to think of some way to make the boundaries clear. Again, they seem to get blurred a lot with Jacob. Then we have page 168. This is Jacob talking at first. I remember this guy, he said in a low voice as Mike parked across the street. The one who thought you were his girlfriend. Is he still confused? I raised one eyebrow. Some people are hard to discourage. Then again, Jacob said thoughtfully, sometimes persistence pays off. And Bella responds, most of the time it's just annoying though. To be clear for the quote, I added the and Bella responds because she doesn't, there's not like a speaking thing and it was getting confusing. Page 171. Sorry. I just reread the quote that was on this page. This, besides the communism line, is like my favorite part of the book. Both Jacob and Mike had claimed the armrests on either side of me. Both of their hands rested lightly, palms up, in an unnatural-looking position, like steel bear traps, open and ready. Sorry, why did I say that like that? Sorry, this is a young adult. Let me try that again. Like steel bear traps, open and ready. Jacob was in the habit of taking my hand whenever the opportunity presented itself, but here in the darkened movie theater, with Mike watching, it would have had a different significance, and I was sure he knew that. I couldn't believe that Mike was thinking the same thing, but his hand was placed exactly like Jacob's. So she's sitting between these two boys who canonically cannot accept the fact that she's not interested in either of them romantically, and the boys on either side of her are sitting with their hands up like this, just on the movie armrests with their hands up like this. Both of them wanting her to place her hand in theirs. So Stephenie Meyer is paralleling Jacob to Mike here, who through the entire first book could not accept that Bella did not want to date him. She's putting Jacob in the exact same position. She's showing us that they are one and the same. Jacob cannot accept that Bella does not want to be with him. And finally, we have page 173, which I think is like the worst part for Jacob. I marked out such a huge part of this. I joined him with a sigh. He looked like he was thinking about blurring more lines. Sure enough... Jeez, just that on its own. I joined him with a sigh. He looked like he was thinking about blurring more lines. Sure enough, as soon as I sat down, he shifted over to put his arm around my shoulders. Jake, I protested, leaning away. He dropped his arm, not looking bothered at all by the minor rejection. He reached out and took my hand firmly, wrapping his other hand around my wrist when I tried to pull away again. Where did he get the confidence from? Now, just hold on a minute, Bella, he said in a calm voice. Tell me something. I grimaced. I didn't want to do this. Not just now, but not ever. There was nothing left in my life at this point that was more important than Jacob Black, but he seemed determined to ruin everything. What? I muttered sourly. You like me, right? You know I do. Better than that joker puking his guts out in there, he gestured towards the bathroom door. Yes, I sighed. Better than any of the other guys you know? He was calm, serene, as if my answer didn't matter. Or he already knew what it was. Better than the girls, too, I pointed out. But that's all, he said, and it wasn't a question. It was hard to answer, to say the word. Would he get hurt and avoid me? How would I stand that? Yes, I whispered. He grinned down at me. That's okay, you know, as long as you like me the best. And you think I'm good-looking, sort of. I'm prepared to be annoyingly persistent. I'm not going to change, I said, and though I tried to keep my voice normal, I could hear the sadness in it. His face was thoughtful, no longer teasing. It's still the other one, isn't it? I cringed. Funny how he seemed to know not to say the name, just like before in the car with the music. He picked up on so much about me that I never said. You don't have to talk about it, he told me. I nodded, grateful. But don't get mad at me for hanging around, okay? Jacob patted the back of my hand. Because I'm not giving up. I've got loads of time. I sighed. You shouldn't waste it on me, I said, though I wanted him to, especially if he was willing to accept me the way I was, damaged goods as is. It's what I want to do, as long as you still like to be with me. I can't imagine how I could not like being with you, I told him honestly. Jacob beamed. I can live with that. Just don't expect more, I warned him, trying to pull my hand away. He held on to it. Obstinately. I'm sorry, I'm still going, but you gotta hear this. This doesn't really bother you, does it? He demanded, squeezing my fingers. No, I sighed. Truthfully, it felt nice. His hand was so much warmer than mine. I always felt too cold these days. And you don't care what he thinks. Jacob jerked his thumb towards the bathroom. I guess not. So what's the problem? The problem, I said, is that it means something different to me than it does to you. Well, he tightened his hand around mine. That's my problem, isn't it? Fine, I grumbled. Don't forget it, though. I won't. The pin's out of the grenade for me now, eh? He poked me in the ribs. I rolled my eyes. I guess if he felt like making a joke out of it, he was entitled. Okay, before you get mad at me, if you haven't seen my first video, let me clarify a few things. 1, I was highly critical of Edward and his behavior in the first book. 2, I understand that this is a romance novel and sometimes we suspend our disbelief. Sometimes the heroes don't have, like, the best intentions or the best behaviors. And we let it go. As a communal fan base of the genre, we let it go a little bit. But I'm going to make the same point here that I made about Edward and his behavior in the first book. This is not a book for adults. This is a young adult novel. And I have let things slide and even commended her for understanding that this is a young adult novel and accounting for that. So if I'm going to be commending her in certain ways, then I'm allowed to uniquely criticize her for it being a young adult romance as opposed to an adult romance. It's one thing to portray a questionable hero with an intended adult audience. It is a completely different thing to write a romance novel for young adult women whose demographic is ages like 11 to 16. That is the target audience for young adult. So these young girls, these very impressionable young girls, are reading this book about a possible romantic hero that does not take no for an answer and essentially berates Bella for the entire book until near the end she's wondering to herself, do I like him? The lines get so blurred by him that she starts to not trust her own opinion of him. Despite the fact that she's been solid the entire time, that she just views him as a friend, his berating eventually gets to her and she starts to question herself and her own interpretation of the situation. And again, if you're about to get mad at me for this, like, well, Edward was emotionally abusive, I was critical of her for making Edward emotionally abusive too. I do think these are damaging things to have in a young adult romance novel. I do think that young girls should not be reading books that show men who act this way and portray it as romantic. Edward and Jacob are uniquely damaging in their own ways. Not only is this never really framed as like a bad thing from Jacob's perspective, but we see it have the effect on Bella that behavior like this would have, where she starts to feel bad, like she's leading on Jacob, despite the fact that she's been super clear with her boundaries and her feelings. And so once again, we're watching Stephenie Meyer understand what is bad about these relationships and why this kind of behavior is wrong, and yet still framing it as a romantic thing that this guy is doing. With Edward, his emotional abuse had the impact on Bella that emotional abuse does, where because Edward was being super wishy-washy, she was reading into every single step that she was taking with him to try and ensure that she didn't upset him because she didn't understand what was upsetting him. That is a very real impact of emotional abuse, right? With Jacob, we are seeing Bella start to question herself and her confidence in her decision that she just wants Jacob to be a friend because of how much he is berating her, and also to personally feel bad on his inability to understand her feelings, despite her being very, very clear about both her feelings and her boundaries. This is, again, probably what would happen to a teenage girl who is being berated by a teenage boy in this way. And there's no kinder word for it. He is berating her into trying to date him. And it's so weirdly metaphoric, because the whole point of this video is that I was going to brainwash myself into liking Jacob, and Jacob is trying to essentially brainwash Bella into liking him. She does not want him. She's made that super clear to him. He does not give up anyway, and this is framed as romantic. And it doesn't make Bella mad at him, it makes her mad at herself. And I take issue with that. At this point, I don't think either Edward or Jacob is good for Bella. But Bella wants Edward, and that has to count for something. Anyway, as they're hanging out, at some point Jacob mentions to Bella that there's this group of boys that have been hanging out on the reservation, and they're kind of sucking in Embry, and that he's worried about Embry because his friend Embry isn't really hanging out with him and Quill anymore, and he's just concerned about him. And he isn't sure about the leader of this group, Sam's, intentions. Through a series of events that isn't really worth breaking down much further, Jacob gets really distant with Bella. Bella gets worried about him. She finds out he's been hanging out with Sam. She finds out that Sam told Jacob that they can't hang out anymore. They have a whole fight about it. In the midst of this, Bella goes to the clearing that she went to with Edward, only to find Laurent there. You remember Laurent from the first book? He was traveling with James and Victoria. Victoria and James, you remember, where James was hunting Bella? James was hunting Bella. He attacked her. You remember James. Edward and the rest of the Cullens tore him to shreds and then burned the pieces. You remember that Laurent. He's in the clearing for some reason. He appears conveniently to let Bella know that Victoria is pissed about Edward killing her mate and has decided to enact her revenge by killing his mate, Bella. Except Laurent is shocked to find that the Cullens have left Bella alone and unprotected, and remarks that this must mean that Edward doesn't care about her that much. So he decides to kill her himself, as this doesn't seem like the revenge that Victoria wants on Edward, so he thinks she'll get over the fact that he did this despite her wanting to be the one to kill Bella herself. And make it painful, I'll add. So he's about to attack her, but then a giant pack of wolves appear. Big wolves, giant wolves. Biggest wolves you've ever seen. Imagine a big wolf. Big old wolf. 5 of them appear, kill Laurent, or chase him off. Bella doesn't know if they successfully kill him or not. She doesn't know what any of this means, but luckily to her, Jacob sneaks into her room and tells her that she can guess his secret because he has already told her at some point what is going on, and she just has to remember. And then he's like, do you remember when I told you what Edward is? And overnight, she remembers that when he was telling her the stories from his culture, when he mentioned the vampires, he also mentioned werewolves. And she figures it out overnight. It still somehow takes her a bit more time to realize that the giant wolves from the forest are these werewolves, but she only has these groundbreaking and seemingly impossible realizations when it's convenient for the narrative. Which leads us to the Quileute Tribe and their representation in this series. We've been having a fun jokey time in this video, and we will continue to do so after this, but this is a really serious subject, and so I'm going to take it seriously. One of the stains on this series' reputation is Stephenie Meyer's representation of the Quileute Tribe, which is a real Native American tribe that exists close to Forks, Washington, which is where this book takes place. Stephenie Meyer has established that she had already made Edward a vampire, but she was struggling to figure out how Bella figures out that Edward is a vampire. Why would she think vampire, right? Like, if she knows Edward isn't human, like, how does she get from not human to vampire? And that's actually kind of a fair point from Stephenie Meyer's perspective. She's got to give her, like, a way to figure this out. However, the way she does that, she's doing research on the area, and she finds the Quileute tribe, and she finds out that a part of their tribe's history and culture is that some of their ancestors were turned into wolves by a traveler. She changed up a bunch of details, made it so they can transition at will. It has nothing to do with a traveler coming through town, and actually it's because they're enemies of the vampires, and they do this so that they can hump vampires? I meant to say hunt. It'd be a completely different story if she wanted them to hump. She made it so that the reason that they do this is because they hunt vampires. They protect the humans from the vampires. And then she threw it in the story. I would like to say that again. She took this tribe's culture, history, beliefs, changed it to fit her paranormal romance novel, and then threw it in the book without their permission or knowledge, and offered them none of the finances from any of this. Don't do that. Okay, don't do that. Let's not do that. I can't believe I have to say this, but someone's culture is not your plot device. Now, the only opinion that truly matters here is the opinion of the Quileute tribe, whose members have felt differently over the years about this representation. Supposedly, there was an article in the New York Post in 2009 called "Vampire Vacation: Twilight Fans Turn a Quiet Indian Reservation into an Unwitting Tourist Mecca." I wasn't able to find the whole thing, so I can't validate, I guess, that this was actually an article in the New York Post. I found it on a website called American Indians and Children's Literature, which I'll link in the description. So take this with a grain of salt, but here's a few snippets from this article, which again supposedly was posted in the New York Post in 2009. There are mixed feelings, says Tribal Council member Anna Rose Council. Over the last 3 months, the tribe has struggled over what to do. This is a phenomenon that is happening, whether we like it or not. Here's another quote. Hospitality is an ingrained part of their culture, but elders are worried about building a tourist economy. They fret about how their creation story is portrayed in the book. The tribe says they were changed from wolves to humans by a traveler. Meyer took literary liberty, enabling them to change back at will in an eternal battle against vampires. I highly recommend you read the whole thing. I'll link it. I don't know that the author's perspective is 100% fair to the Quileute members, especially given how in-depth some of the Quileute members have gone since on the actual damage to the reservation that this did. I found this really interesting video that I will also link, that I strongly encourage you watch, of a tribal member talking about these ups and downs, how it led to this caricaturization of their culture, and it led to all these tourists coming to the area that weren't exactly being respectful of the area. There are parts of the reservation that they try to keep reserved for only tribal members, and people would show up feeling entitled to see these areas. That being said, the media attention that they got from this was potentially a factor in them getting some tribal land back from the government that they had been fighting for about 50 years with no traction, that all of a sudden seemed to slide through nicely now that the entire country was aware of their tribe. This is not something that we should do. Stephenie Meyer was wrong for this, objectively. I'm glad the Quileute were able to benefit from this in some way and that it was not exclusively negative for them, but that doesn't make it right for Stephenie Meyer to have done. And this is not behavior that we should be encouraging amongst authors, and it's certainly behavior we should be criticizing in novels that come out, as this kind of stuff still happens all the time, and the portrayal of Native Americans in media is still super damaging, and it's just not something that gets talked about enough. One line in the article stuck out to me a lot, where the same tribal member, Anna Rose Council, says, "This is our opportunity to educate people on Quileute history." I will link the Quileute's website in the description. I highly recommend you go check it out. They have a ton on their histories and their stories. They have a book that you can read that includes a bunch of their history and stories, and they also have a bunch on their language. I will also link a website from the Burke Museum, which was put together in collaboration with the Quileute tribe, that is specifically about the misinformation that existed in Twilight and clearing up some of the things that were in the book that were wrong, and also talks about the damage it had to the reservation. So all of these resources will be linked in the description, and I strongly encourage you to go check them out and learn about the Quileute's actual culture and history. There's not an easy transition out of that. I'm just gonna tell you guys, we're going back to the jokey energy now. This is such a hard transition. I'm so sorry. Okay, so Jacob's freshly turned into a werewolf, and Bella's figured this out. So now Jacob can talk to her about it and be honest with her about it. We find out that part of the reason why he couldn't tell her before is because Sam is their alpha, and Sam had kind of put down this rule saying that they couldn't do it, and they can't fight against these like alpha rulings. It actually like controls them, like they can't go against the alpha. Werewolves are natural enemies of vampires in this universe, at least. And when Carlisle and his family lived in Forks the first time, Jacob's ancestors had become werewolves in response to the proximity to the vampires. But because Carlisle and his coven don't attack humans, they managed to negotiate a treaty that allowed them all to live in peace, that involved the Cullens never going onto the reservation land, and the tribal members that are wolves never transitioning into wolves off of the reservation. It's the proximity to the vampires that turns them into werewolves, so the generations in between Jacob's great-grandparents and him don't turn into vampires. She demands to know why him being a werewolf meant they couldn't be friends. And he tells her that they sometimes morph out of strong emotion, and this makes them somewhat dangerous for humans to be around until they have more control over themselves. He mentions briefly that this happened to Sam and his now fiancée Emily, and that she is permanently disfigured from this incident. This leads to a fun tiny detail that I do love her incorporating, which is that their clothes do not morph with them. When they morph into the werewolves, if they are fully dressed, then they tear all those clothing to shreds. This is fun in the book, but immediately becomes weird in the movie. Because this, combined with the fact that wolves run at a higher body temperature, and that their human bodies are still tougher than a normal human's body, even when they're not in their wolf form, and that they heal really fast, even in their human forms, all of this leads to Jacob walking around barefoot, shirtless, rocking jorts for essentially the entire duration of the rest of this series. I cannot stress enough, for like 90% of the scenes after this in the movie, Jacob is only wearing jorts, which really makes you feel bad for Taylor Lautner, especially when you hear male actors talk about how dehydrated they get to film these shirtless scenes so that they just look as cut as possible and they don't even have water weight. Someone get this man a glass of water. But anyway, the wolf transition has also caused him to grow exponentially, so he is now 6'5" and yoked. The shock of this transition and the newfound responsibilities as a protector mature him exponentially, leading us back to why I think it was smart for Stephenie Meyer to make him so immature at the beginning of the book. It's an accurate and convenient change to his character because it makes it a lot easier to forget how young he is now. Bella remarks that the Cullens have left now, so she asks Jacob why they're still turning into werewolves despite the fact that the vampires don't seem to be around anymore. And he says that they think it's because of Laurent and Victoria, who are still around despite the fact that the Cullens have left. So the Cullens had been there for a few years, and even though they are gone, there are no vampires in the area, so that's why they're still turning into wolves. Bella lets him know that Victoria is hunting her, which naturally leads to Jake getting very upset and promising to protect her. Thanks, Jake. Then we get a few more scenes of Bella interacting and bonding with the wolves and with Jacob. This leads us to the only direct mention of Romeo and Juliet thus far, Bella's internal monologue when she's figuring out if she could ever love Jacob. I will admit there could have been subtle references throughout this book that I wouldn't have gotten. I'm not intimately familiar with Romeo and Juliet. I loosely know what happens, but I don't know all the little details, and so she could have been referencing it in other ways that I just didn't realize. That being said, I think this monologue is very damaging to the Team Jacob argument. Bella is essentially thinking to herself, could I settle for Jacob? She's like, I will never love him like I love Edward, but maybe I could get to a place where I love him a little bit. I love him enough to be happy with him. I love him as more than a friend, but less than I love this other guy. Talk about a romance, but a happy ending. I certainly want my heroines to wonder if it's shitty of them to become romantically involved with a man that they really only view as a friend. But hey, maybe they can fake it till they make it. There's a line on page 299 that directly says, Juliet gets dumped and ends up with Paris would never have been a hit, which is Stephenie Meyer essentially directly telling us that this does not happen and that Bella does not settle and end up with Jacob. One could make the argument, I'm sure some of you will in the comments, that really what Jacob is saying is that if he's going to be around her, he wants it to be in a relationship, and so he's leaving it up to Bella to decide if that's what she wants or not. And Bella is the one who feels like she can't live without him, and so she's trying to think of if she can be just friends with him or not. That is certainly a perspective, but I don't think that's fair at this point in the book. When you really look at the conversations between them, and again, when you think back to me talking about how Stephenie Meyer is actually really good at showing the mental space that this kind of treatment would put somebody in. This is still Jacob's fault. I'm sorry, but it is. Jacob has been badgering her essentially the entire book. He's so persistent. He will not take no for an answer. He's essentially convinced her that his unrequited feelings are her fault, that she is somehow doing something to him by not wanting to be in a relationship with him. And so, despite Jacob never explicitly saying this with his words, Bella now feels like eventually Jacob is not going to want to spend time with her anymore once he realizes that there really is no future for them romantically. So she is kind of self-inflicting this. She is self-thinking, I have to be in a relationship with him for him to stick around, and I can't spend time with him if I'm not in a relationship with him anymore. This mindset is caused by Jacob, and it's caused by his treatment of her. And at this point, I am just left with the feeling that you have to believe that if Bella and Jacob ended up in a relationship, that Bella would eventually feel the same for Jacob that she did for Edward, or else I just do not understand how you could possibly be Team Jacob. Especially if you love Jacob, because that's not really fair to him. Why would you want him to be with somebody that doesn't really want to be with him? But again, I am trying. I genuinely am trying to be Team Jacob. I mean that from the bottom of my heart. So I decided to move forward with this perspective. Think to myself, okay, if Bella and Jacob ended up in a relationship, that eventually Bella will feel as strongly for Jacob as she does for Edward. That is the mindset we're moving forward with. And then Harry Clearwater, who is an elder in the tribe and also is Seth and Leah's dad, dies of a heart attack. She kills off a tribal elder for one reason and one reason only, which is so that when Edward calls Bella's house pretending to be Carlisle asking for Charlie, Jacob can say on the phone that Charlie is at a funeral. Which we aren't there in the plot yet, but that's like literally the only reason that Harry Clearwater dies. So anyway, Bella decides to go cliff jumping to blow off some steam. She almost drowns and Jacob rescues her. And that's how she finds out that Harry Clearwater is even in the hospital. And she feels horrible about the stupid decision and essentially resolves to make all smarter decisions from here on out because she could have gotten seriously hurt. And her dad losing his friend Harry really puts into perspective for her what she almost did to him, and she feels bad about it. Then Alice shows up. You remember Alice, right? Edward's sister. She can see the future, but the future she sees is dependent on people's decisions. We remember Alice, right? Alice shows back up and is very pleased to find that Bella is in fact still alive, and she lets Bella know that she had a vision of Bella jumping off a cliff and did not see Bella resurface in her vision. Bella assures her that she was rescued by Jacob, which is very confusing to Alice because Alice did not see this in her vision, and typically her visions are accurate, both once a decision is made, but certainly once the events actually happen. She's usually able to see it, so she's very confused by this. And they find out that she's not really able to use her powers on the werewolves, so she cannot see the future where the werewolves are involved. Harry Clearwater succumbs to his injuries from the heart attack, and Charlie goes to the funeral, which for some reason neither Bella or Jacob go to. I don't know why they wouldn't go to this funeral. Bella's very close to her dad, and Jacob was very close to both Harry and his family, so why they didn't go to his funeral, I'm not really sure, but I guess it's convenient for the narrative. Carlisle calls Bella's house. Jacob answers the phone. I've already been over this a little, but he says on the phone, no, Charlie's not here. He's at the funeral. And Carlisle just hangs up. Alice comes bounding down the stairs with this horrified look on her face, and she's like, Bella, no. And Bella's like, what? And she's like, it's Edward. And Bella's like, what's with Edward? And she's like, what just happened? And Jacob's like, Carlisle called, and we told him that Charlie's at the funeral. And Alice was like, oh my God, that was not Carlisle, that was Edward, and now Edward thinks you're dead. Rosalie told him about my vision and he was calling to confirm. And you saying that Charlie was at a funeral was a confirmation to Edward that Bella is now dead. Oh no. Bella's like, why is this a problem? We can just call him. Tell him I'm alive. Alice is like, ooh, he knew we would try and stop him because now he's determined to take his own life by provoking the Volturi, essentially. He's going to go ask the Volturi to voluntarily kill him, but if they refuse, then he is going to provoke them into killing him. He is determined to die. And he has left his phone behind because he knows we're going to try and talk him out of it. We're going to try and track him. Then Bella and Alice write Charlie a quick note, and they rush off to Italy to save Edward. A montage ensues that's really important for only one reason. Bella is convinced that the reason Edward is doing this is because he feels guilty. And so she's sure that as soon as she sees him, he's going to know she's alive, she's going to have saved his life, but that they will not be getting back together. This is what she thinks. They end up making it, of course, and with seconds to spare, Bella throws herself at Edward. And he looks at her and he thinks that he's already died. He thinks that the Volturi stopped him from stepping into the sun right before he did, because a bunch of humans would have witnessed him, and that would have outed the existence of vampires to the humans in the city, and the Volturi would have grabbed him, ripped him to shreds, killed him right there, and that they were so quick about it that he didn't even notice, and now he is dead and in heaven with Bella. This is really, really important, and I will bring this back up later. Remember this? The Volturi bring them into their creepy underground castle, where they decide not to kill Bella despite her knowledge of vampire existence, mostly because they're intrigued, or specifically their leader is intrigued, by what powers Bella might have once she's a vampire because of her weird mental resistance to all of their vampiric powers. They instead give Edward a warning to turn her into a vampire quickly and send them on their way. Humans cannot know of their existence, but they're giving them time to turn Bella into a vampire. Mostly because it's convenient to the narrative, but we'll accept their reasoning. Then they leave and fly home, and Bella forces herself to stay awake the whole time because she's still convinced that as soon as Edward sees her safely home, he will disappear. But the book's not over. Bella sleeps about 14 hours upon their return and wakes up groggy and pretty convinced that the events of the past few days were a dream. Edward is in her bedroom, and you guys are never gonna believe this. She's convinced that she has now died and gone to heaven. She thinks that when she went cliff diving, she actually did die. She feels really bad for what she did to Charlie and Renee and Jacob and all the other people who love her. And she is convinced that she's been given a fake, almost vision version of Edward for her to live out her existence in heaven with. Remember? Remember? What did I tell you to remember? That Edward thought the same thing. Stephenie Meyer has once again showed us her deep understanding of metaphors and references in literature, which makes her bizarre choices like so much more frustrating because she has these moments of genius. She has moments of genius, and you see this and you're like, well, then why the heck did you make all these other decisions? Why did we do all of this if you're capable of this? Here we have exactly copied the ending of Romeo and Juliet, where Juliet fakes her death, Romeo finds her dead and kills himself, and Juliet wakes up, finds Romeo dead, and kills herself. In this version, Juliet faking her own death is an accident. Bella accidentally fakes her death, but Edward believes her to be dead. So he tries to kill himself, Bella stops him, and right as she stops him, he thinks that he has died, and now he's in heaven. And the same thing happens with Bella when she gets home, that she thinks she has died, and now she's in heaven. In this version, Romeo and Juliet, played by Edward and Bella, they have these symbolic ego deaths that are marked by them thinking for a second that they have physically died. Edward, upon realizing that he is not dead, realizes that Bella is the love of his life, he is the love of hers, and that really there's no reason to keep them separate. It causes both of them too much emotional pain, and it actually doesn't keep Bella that much safer because there's all this other danger involved. He gets the whole story from Alice right away because he can read her mind, even though he can't read Bella's, if you remember. So he knows right away everything that happened leading up to there and realizes that Bella was no safer without him, and also that she was having just as hard a time emotionally as he was. He was convinced that she would eventually get over her, but all of this is a realization to him that she is no better without him than she was with him, and so they might as well be together. And again, this is kind of kicked off by him thinking that he has died and gone to heaven to be with her. Bella, upon realizing that she is not dead, is now able to fully internalize and accept Edward's love for her. That both his willingness to take his own life and his voice appearing in her head while she was doing dangerous things are these markers that he really truly does love her. And through conversation, Edward is able to get her to realize that he didn't try to kill himself out of guilt, he tried to kill himself because of how much he loves her. So she herself is also ready to go all in on the relationship, but this time with a lot healthier mindset and an understanding that it is mutual and that Edward truly does love her. So it fixes some of her confidence issues. Thus, Stephenie Meyer shows us an alternate ending to Romeo and Juliet, where the two characters physically survive by emotionally killing the pieces of themselves that were blocking the relationship, and moving forward together in a much healthier place, on the same page, and ready to start their life together. The title New Moon has two representations here through the book, partially representing the dark time this couple spent when they were apart, and also representing the fresh start that they both have now together, having had a second traumatic experience help them get over the first traumatic experience they had together. And I gotta say, props. This is smart. And that's where I'm saying, like, I feel bad because when I started this series, I really thought that I was gonna find all this evidence that Stephenie Meyer is not that good an author. I just want to reiterate what was basically my main point in the original Twilight video. There is fair criticism of Stephenie Meyer, and there is fair criticism of this series. However, the criticism that Stephenie Meyer is a bad author, that she doesn't understand writing, and that these books are stupid and they serve no purpose is not fair. It's a dumb take. It basically only exists because of how popular Twilight got. There are people who just want to hate on it because of how big it was. You're welcome to think it was stupid, but it's not fair to say Stephenie Meyer doesn't know what she's doing when it comes to literature. I feel this just as strongly at the end of this book as I do at the end of the last book, despite, again, still having criticism for the book. I don't think Stephenie Meyer writes like the most productive heroes. I don't think she's portraying the healthiest relationships, and I certainly think there's plenty of cultural appropriation going on. Those are all fair criticisms of Twilight. Criticisms we should discuss in depth, but it is a brain dead take to just be like, these books are stupid, they're bad, and Stephenie Meyer is a bad author. It's too simplistic. There are ups and downs here. And the conversation has to be more nuanced than that. That's all I'm saying. And it's so, oh my God, the craziest part about all of it, when you flip to the acknowledgements and you read them, like I did, because you're making a video on New Moon, and you find out that she named Jacob after her own brother, her biological physical brother that exists in real life. So I'm just gonna leave you with that and move on. Anyway, the rest of this book is set up for the next book, Eclipse, where the Cullens essentially vote on whether or not they are going to change Bella into a vampire. This is because Edward is convinced he's figured out a way to keep Bella human, and him and Rosalie are the only ones who object to Bella becoming a vampire. The rest of the family want her to. Bella argues that it's not just Edward's future to think about, but it's all of the Cullens' future to think about, because if the Volturi decide to come after them because they have not changed Bella into a vampire, it would affect all of them, not just Edward. So she leaves it up to a vote, and she wins the vote. So she's kind of like, all right, Carlo, change me now. And they're all like, wait, that would end the book series. We can't do that. We also can't have you like mysteriously disappear when Charlie like knew that you were with Alice last, and you left a note saying you were going off to like help Edward with something, and you would explain when you got back. He is definitely gonna blame us for your disappearance. So we're gonna have to figure that one out. We gotta think a little bit harder about what our story is gonna be, how we're gonna frame this, all of that. So Bella agrees to wait until after her high school graduation, because it's a lot easier for her to disappear at that point, because she'll be over 18 and graduated high school. Then Edward gets her to agree to marry him before she changes as well, by offering to change her himself if she waits until after they're married. Now, I really like this because for some reason I had in my head, and I don't know if this happens in the movie version or not, but I had in my head that the reason that they got married while she was still human was because she wanted to bone him while she was still human, and he said he wouldn't bone her unless they were officially married. I don't know where I got that. Again, I don't know if that's how it happens like in the movie, but I like this better. I like this a lot better. I know in the books they still do wait until they're married to bone because Stephenie Meyer is Mormon, but it's nice to hear that the proposal did not happen because they wanted to bone, because that in and of itself is also a weird representation for kids to read. It's just kind of a strange thing. So I'm glad that the reason they're getting married is not so that they can have sex. Bella is in a world of trouble with Charlie, which is only made worse by Jacob telling Charlie about the whole motorcycle thing, which Bella is really, really mad at him about. He says it was to get her grounded so she couldn't spend any more time with Edward. She lets him know that she was already grounded. That's why she hasn't been down to see him, and that he would know that if he had answered any of her calls. He then reminds Edward and Bella about the treaty, which does not just say that they cannot kill a human, but that they also cannot bite a human, including biting them with the intention of turning them into a vampire. So if they bite any humans, they have broken the treaty. I guess in theory they have not broken this yet, because Edward was not the one who bit Bella. He sucked the venom out of Bella's hand. So he's drunk her blood, but he did not technically bite her. This opens them up for a loophole where they maybe could have injected Edward's venom into Bella, which they do a little bit, but he does also bite her in the end, so she didn't use that as a loophole to get around the treaty. But Bella tells Jacob that that's none of his business, and this really upsets him because he thought that he was just giving them the warning in theory, and her reacting that way basically confirms for Jacob that she is actually considering becoming a vampire, which really upsets him. And the book ends with Bella in serious trouble with Charlie, betrothed to Edward, and dedicated to becoming a vampire after she marries Edward right after their high school graduation, and also with a fractured relationship with Jacob. So what did I think? Did it work? Am I Team Jacob now? Honestly, I'm not sure. Both these boys suck so much, and I'm not even kidding. I don't like either of them, really, for her, and I also don't really like her that much at this point. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm really enjoying rereading the series, and I'm being a little bit dramatic here, but if I really took a critical eye to this, I could not tell you which of these boys is better for her, because they both suck in their own unique way. New Moon has always been my least favorite of the Twilight books, and I stand by that now. Before, it was just because Edward was gone the whole time, and I thought it was pointless, and every time I reread the series, I rushed through it as quickly as I could. I don't know why I didn't just skip it. I'm a completionist like that, I guess. If I had to choose one of them for her, who would I choose? I had no idea, and I began to question myself, my perspective, my whole life. I was always so firmly Team Edward. Can I go back on that now? Could I really want Jacob for her over Edward? So I went to the only home I know. The desert. The desert landscape called to me with the promise of understanding, of answers. I didn't know who I was anymore. Do I love Edward? Do I love Jacob? Who do I choose? The answer was out here somewhere. I knew it. I just had to find it. Could I let go of everything I'd ever known? Start a new journey? I wandered for hours, no sign of civilization. Just me, the cacti, and the sun. No, don't pan over there. I was all alone. There was no trail. I was in the middle of the desert. I was completely and utterly alone.
Bella! Where the hell have you been, Luca? Bella! Where the hell have you been, Luca? Where the hell have you been, Luca?
I could hear it echoing. My salvation, under that tree. The very answers I was looking for. Which one would I choose? Edward or Jacob? Cold or warmth? Passion or security? This is it. This is where I would find my answers. As I sat there, the question kept ringing in my head. Who should I choose? And I couldn't let go of the word at the end of that sentence. Choose. Who am I to choose? Why should I decide who Bella ends up with? Why do I have that power? And I found my answer in this idea. I don't have to choose. It's not my decision. Bella will decide who she ends up with. And with this crazy and groundbreaking idea in my head, that women deserve the right to make their own decisions, that they shouldn't have anyone else telling them what they should and shouldn't do, I left the desert, ready to read the rest of the series and find out what Bella decides. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I had so much fun making this. This is one of my favorite videos that I have made to date. Remember to follow me on Instagram and to fill out the Google form. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!